In the autumn of 2011, a 72-year-old woman walked into the corporate offices of Northbridge Timber holding a cream-colored envelope. She didn't knock, she didn't raise her voice. She simply asked to see the regional manager. Inside the envelope was a single invoice. One line item, $47,281.50. The manager opened it. A young woman, Wharton MBA, Six Sigma certified, the kind of executive who carried a stopwatch in her pocket and measured everything in quarterly returns. She laughed. She shouldn't have, because the old woman standing across from her wasn't asking for anything. She wasn't begging. She wasn't even angry. She was simply presenting the bill. For 11 years, that factory had been dumping wood scraps over a chain link fence onto her property. 11 years of forklifts. 11 years of what the company called waste disposal. The town called her a hoarder. Her own granddaughter called it Grandma's trash heap. The new manager had threatened to sue her if she didn't clear it out in 30 days. And so she did clear it out, but not the way anyone expected. What happened in the next 60 seconds inside that office would unravel a secret 11 years in the making, a secret that would shatter one woman and vindicate another. This is her story, and it begins with a fence. The fence went up in the spring of 1999. Iris Halloran heard it before she saw it. The low rumble of a bulldozer, the clang of steel posts hitting the bed of a flatbed truck, the whine of a hydraulic auger biting into the spring-soft earth. She was in the workshop when it started, bent over a piece of black walnut, running the heel of her palm across the grain, feeling for tear out. She paused, set down the block plane, listened. Outside, somewhere west of her property, a man was shouting instructions. Another man was answering. Trucks, diesel engines, the mechanical heartbeat of something large and impersonal. She walked to the workshop window, wiped a circle of dust away with her sleeve, and looked. There they were. 6 men in orange vests, a surveyor, 2 pickups, a flatbed loaded with chain link panels stacked like dominoes. They were measuring, marking, spray painting little orange flags into the ground along what had been, for 77 years, nothing more than a line of wild cherry trees and blackberry brambles. Now it would be a fence, 1,240 feet of it, 4 feet high. Chain link, industrial, permanent. Iris exhaled. Because she'd known this was coming, the county had approved the rezoning 8 months ago. The factory was a done deal. Northbridge Timber, the sign at the county office had read. Engineered wood products, 80,000 square feet, 112 jobs. Coldwater Bend needed those jobs. She knew that. But she hadn't expected the fence to feel like this, like a line being drawn across her father's land. She turned back to the bench, picked up the plane, lined the blade against the walnut, and worked, because that was what you did. When the world rearranged itself outside your window, you picked up your tools, and you kept going. That was the first thing Callaway Halloran ever taught her. Coldwater Bend, Vermont, in 1999 was a town of 1,943 people, a general store, a volunteer fire department, 2 churches, both of them small, a diner called May's, that had been called May's since 1958, even though May herself had died in 1981. The kind of place where everyone knew your last name and your father's last name, and, if you were unlucky, the name of the dog you had when you were 9. Iris had lived in Coldwater Bend her entire life, 61 years. She'd grown up in the house she still lived in, a 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and a green tin roof set on 3¼ acres at the bottom of a long sloping field. The land had been bought by her grandfather, Ezra Halloran, in 1922. $800. Cash. He'd worked 9 years to save it. Her father, Calloway, had built the workshop on the back of the property in 1947, dug the foundation himself, by hand, with a shovel and a wheelbarrow, and a stubbornness that had become family legend. Iris had been born inside that house in 1938. She'd learned to read at the kitchen table, learned to cook at her mother's elbow, learned arithmetic at the little one-room schoolhouse 3 miles down the road, the one they'd torn down in 1962 to put up a water tower. And she'd learned to work wood, not from her mother. Her mother, Ardith, had been a seamstress, a good one. Quick fingers, patient eyes. But Iris had learned wood from her father because there had been no son. There had been Iris, and there had been her younger sister Cora, who died of scarlet fever at 6. And then there had been no more children because Ardith had nearly died bringing Cora into the world, and the doctor had said never again. So there was Iris, the only one left. And Calloway Halloran had 2 choices. He could let his trade die with him, or he could teach his daughter. He chose the daughter. She was 8 years old the first time he put a chisel in her hand, showed her how to hold it, bevel up, both hands, light pressure. Let the steel do the work, Iris girl. Don't fight it. Listen to it. She'd ruined her first 3 pieces of poplar. He hadn't yelled. He'd just handed her another one, and another, and another, until she stopped ruining them. By the time she was 12, she could cut a dovetail joint blindfolded. By 16, she was building furniture good enough to sell. By 20, she had a certificate from the Vermont Trades Guild, the only woman in her cohort. The instructors had been polite about it. The other students had not. She'd outworked all of them. She married a man named Tobias Marsh when she was 23. He worked at the paper mill in Street Johnsbury. Quiet man, steady. He'd grown up in a logging family, and he understood, in a way some men didn't, that his wife's hands were not for resting. They had a daughter, Margaret, born in 1962. And then Tobias died in 1983. He was 48. A loader at the mill snapped a cable. The cable whipped back. It caught him in the side of the head. He was dead before they got him to the hospital in Burlington. Iris was 45. She buried him in the cemetery behind the Methodist church. She wore her mother's black dress. She did not cry at the service. She cried later, alone, in the workshop, with her face pressed against a beam of red oak that Tobias had helped her install the year before. Margaret grew up, moved to Boston, married a man Iris liked but didn't quite understand. They had a daughter of their own, Wren, born in 1990. And then Margaret and her husband divorced in 2001, messy, loud, the kind of divorce that took 2 years and 3 lawyers and left everyone smaller than they'd been before it started. That's how Wren came to spend her summers with Iris. But that comes later. In the spring of 1999, Iris was 61 years old, widowed 16 years. A grandmother she barely knew, a daughter who called twice a month, a mother, Ardith, now 82, who lived with her in the farmhouse and spent most days reading mystery novels in the sunroom, and a workshop that was quietly, slowly going broke. She didn't talk about that part, not even to Ardith, because what was there to say? The orders had been thinning for years. People didn't buy hand-built furniture the way they used to. They bought it from catalogs, from a Swedish company with showrooms the size of airplane hangars, from discount warehouses that imported pine bookcases from Vietnam and pressboard dressers from Indonesia. Iris's pieces took weeks to build. They cost what they cost. And every year the number of people willing to pay what they cost got smaller. She made up the difference by teaching. 3 days a week she drove 42 minutes to Burlington Vocational Technical Institute, taught intermediate joinery, $26 an hour, health insurance, a small pension. She liked the students, most of them, but it wasn't the workshop. It wasn't her father's workshop. It wasn't the life she'd been promised when she was 9 years old, and her father had told her, hand on her shoulder, "This will all be yours one day, Iris girl. You'll keep it going. You're the one." She was the one, and the one was tired. So when the fence went up, when the truck started rolling, when the factory crews began clearing Lot 7 across the property line, Iris didn't say much. She didn't complain. She just watched. The factory opened in October of 1999, 8 months after the fence. Northbridge Timber, a subsidiary of a larger conglomerate she'd never heard of. They built engineered architectural beams, the kind that went into the ceilings of expensive lake houses and corporate retreats. They shipped product to 42 states. The trucks rolled in at 6 every morning, massive shipments of raw lumber, keyline dried Douglas fir from Oregon, southern yellow pine from Georgia, laminated veneer stock from a mill in Quebec. The trucks rolled out by 4 every afternoon, finished beams, trusses, engineered headers, bound for construction sites she'd never see. Iris watched all of it, from her kitchen window, from the workshop, from the line of cherry trees that still ran along her side of the fence, even though their roots were starting to creep under the chain link now, looking for old soil. She watched, and she noticed something. It took her almost a full year to notice it, because Iris Halloran was a patient woman, and patience, she had learned, was just attention without a clock. What she noticed was the dumpster. It was a yellow steel container, 40 cubic yards, stationed at the back corner of the factory lot. The hauling truck came every other day, hooked the dumpster to its hydraulic lift, tipped it, drove away, brought it back empty. Every other day. For a full year, Iris started paying attention to what was inside. She would walk to the fence line in the evenings, pretend to be checking the cherry trees, or pulling blackberry brambles, or whatever excuse she needed. And she would look into the dumpster. She didn't believe what she was seeing, because what she was seeing was wood, not scraps, not splinters, not sawdust. Wood, 3-foot lengths of perfect Douglas fir, 2x10s, the grain so straight you could have cut a violin top out of them. Blocks of laminated maple, 18 inches long, the kind of stock she'd been buying for $46 a board foot from a specialty supplier in Burlington. Sheets of Baltic birch plywood, void-free, 14 plies, the kind of plywood that made her cry a little inside whenever she had to pay for it, because the good stuff cost $90 a sheet and lasted forever. All of it in the dumpster, going to the landfill. Iris stood at the fence on a Tuesday evening in November of 2000, her hands gripping the chain link, the metal cold through her work gloves, the smell of diesel and cut pine drifting across the property line. And she watched a forklift driver dump a load of 2x6 fir into the dumpster, pristine, keyline dried, maybe 200 board feet of it. 200 board feet, at the going rate $600 of lumber. Gone. She closed her eyes, took a breath, because she could feel her father standing next to her. She could feel him so clearly that she half expected, when she opened her eyes again, to see him there in his canvas work coat, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. Calloway Halloran, who had built her childhood with materials salvaged from the collapsed mill after the flood of 1913, who had taught her, from the time she could walk, that waste was not a category of material. It was a failure of imagination. She opened her eyes. The forklift driver was gone. The dumpster sat under the orange floodlights of the factory yard. 40 cubic yards, full of treasure, Going to the dump, Iris turned around, walked back to the house. She didn't sleep that night. She thought, she thought about her father, about the workshop, about the pension she was building at the vocational school, about Ardith in the sunroom, getting older every month, every day, about Margaret in Boston with a daughter Iris barely knew. She thought about the fence, and she thought about the wood, and by the time the sun came up over the eastern ridge, she had made a decision. It wasn't a plan yet. It was just a decision. The decision was this: that wood was not going to the landfill. Not all of it. Not the good pieces. Not while she had a workshop and a memory and two hands that still knew how to use them. She walked over to the factory the next morning, November of 2000, wearing her canvas work coat, the same one her father had worn before her, which she had altered to fit, taking in the shoulders and shortening the sleeves. She walked through the visitor's gate. The receptionist asked who she was here to see. Iris said she didn't know. She said, "I need to talk to whoever runs the loading dock." The receptionist made a phone call. After a few minutes, a man came down, mid-50s, heavy set, a limp in his left leg. He wore a hard hat and a clipboard. His name was Calvin Mosley. Calvin had been a shift foreman at Northbridge for 11 months. Before that, he'd run the loading dock at a paper plant in New Hampshire for 22 years. He looked at Iris, took in the canvas coat, the work boots, the gray hair pinned back in a way that suggested it didn't get pinned back for company. He said, "Yes, ma'am. What can I do for you?" Iris said, "I live next door." Calvin nodded slowly. He'd seen the farmhouse, of course, the workshop, the little woman who came out and tended her cherry trees in the mornings. He hadn't known she was a craftsman. Iris said, "I want to ask about your offcuts." Calvin tilted his head. "Our offcuts?" She said, "The wood you throw away, in the dumpster, out back." He shrugged. "That's just waste. Disposal contract. $1,500 a month." "Why?" Iris looked him in the eye. She said, "Some of that is good wood." Calvin didn't disagree. He couldn't. He'd been thinking the same thing for 10 months, watching the dumpster fill up every other day with material his own grandfather, a furniture maker from Vermont, would have wept to see thrown out. Iris said, "If I came over and took some of it, would anyone mind?" Calvin thought about it. He thought about it for maybe 4 seconds. He said, "Take what you want, ma'am. It's all going to the dump." Iris said, "Thank you." Calvin said, "But don't get in the way of the forklift." She nodded. Then she said, "Could you have someone tip the bin over the fence at the back corner? It would save my back." Calvin laughed, a real laugh, not unkind. He said, "Lady, I'll have them dump it on your porch if you want." Iris allowed herself a small smile. She said, "The fence will be fine." And that was it. 28 words. Between two people who had never met before that morning, and who would, over the next 8 years, exchange maybe 400 words total. No contract. No paperwork. No lawyers. Just two people of a certain generation looking at each other, understanding each other, and agreeing. The kind of agreement that doesn't exist anymore. The kind that used to hold up bridges. The next day, a Wednesday, the forklift driver took the off-cut bin to the back corner of the factory lot, lifted it over the fence, tipped it. Iris was standing on her side of the property line when it happened. The wood came down in a cascade, a clatter and a boom, 2x4s and 2x6s and chunks of laminated maple and sheets of plywood tumbling onto her grandfather's grass. Some of the pieces split when they landed, most didn't. The forklift driver waved at her through the fence. A young guy, maybe 22. Iris waved back. He drove away, and Iris stood there, alone, looking at the pile. maybe 400 board feet of usable lumber. She crouched down, picked up a length of 2 by 6 fir, 22 inches long, straight, killine dried, not a knot in it, a piece of wood that, in her workshop, could become the corner brace of a kitchen cabinet, the leg of a small table, the seat of a stool, a piece of wood that, 20 minutes ago, was on its way to the landfill. Iris held it. She brought it close to her face. She smelled it, that sharp, resinous smell of Douglas fir, the smell of forests on the other side of the country, the smell of work and possibility. She closed her eyes. She thought about her father. She thought, very quietly, "Daddy, look what they were going to throw away." She opened her eyes. The sun was setting behind the western ridge. The factory floodlights had clicked on. The fence threw long shadows across the field. The pile of wood sat at her feet, glowing slightly in the dusk. Iris Halloran stood up. She carried the 2 by 6 back toward the workshop. She didn't yet know what she would build, but she knew, suddenly, with a certainty she hadn't felt in years, that she would build something. It would be the first thing she had felt that certain about since Tobias died. The second delivery came on Friday, the third on Monday. By Thanksgiving, there was a pile of wood in the back corner of Iris's property that was bigger than her car. By Christmas, it was bigger than the workshop's lean-to roof. By spring of 2001, it was visible from the county road, and people started to talk. That was when Iris decided to do something her father would have done. She decided to sort it, not just take what she needed and leave the rest, not just pick through it like a scavenger. She decided to treat the pile the way a librarian treats a delivery of books. She started in March of 2001, a cold weekend, wind from the north, her hands inside her father's old leather gloves, the palms darkened with 40 years of someone else's labor. She separated by species first. Douglas fir to the south, maple to the north, oak when it appeared, which was rare, to the east. Pine, the most common, sprawled out along the middle. Then she separated by dimension, 2 by 4s together, 2 by 6s together. 4 by 4s, the heavy stuff, on the bottom. Plywood sheets stood on edge against the back of the workshop wall where they wouldn't warp from sitting flat. Then she examined every piece, every single piece, by eye, by hand, anything with a structural flaw, a deep crack, a heart check, a loose knot. Went to the firewood pile, which she stacked neatly in a crosshatch pattern at the western edge of her land. Anything sound, anything straight, anything with grain you could read, got the good treatment. The good treatment was something her grandfather had taught her father, and her father had taught her. It was called stickering. You laid down a foundation, heavy timbers, 6 by 6s if you had them, lifted off the ground by concrete blocks. The blocks kept the wood out of the damp. Then you laid a course of boards across the foundation, side by side, not touching, a finger's width between them. Then, perpendicular to the boards, you placed stickers. Small, uniform pieces of wood, about 3/4 of an inch thick, every 2 feet along the length. Then another course of boards on top of the stickers, then more stickers, then more boards. What you ended up with was a stack of lumber with a 1-inch gap of air between every single piece. Air that moved, air that breathed, air that let the wood acclimate to the local humidity, settle, release the internal stresses of milling, become stable in a way kyline drying alone could never quite accomplish. Iris's stickering technique was, by 2001, 43 years old. She had been doing it since she was 18. It was beautiful. The stacks, when she finished one, looked like something. Not a pile, not refuse. A library of lumber, cataloged by species, dimension, and date of arrival, recorded in her steady architectural script in a small weather-beaten notebook she kept in the workshop drawer. She didn't know yet why she was doing this. She wasn't building anything specific. She just couldn't stand to see good wood lying on the ground. So she sorted it, and she stickered it, and she wrote it down. Wren arrived in late June of 2001. She was 11 years old. She came on a Tuesday. Her mother dropped her off in a red sedan that had seen better years. Margaret stayed for exactly 11 minutes. She drank a glass of iced tea standing up in the kitchen. She didn't take off her sunglasses. She kissed her daughter on the top of the head, told her to be good for Grandma, and drove away. Wren stood in the driveway, a pink suitcase by her feet, a backpack on her shoulders, her hair in 2 braids. Iris watched from the porch. Then she walked down the steps, slowly, the way you'd approach a deer that had wandered into your yard and didn't yet know whether you were a threat. She said, "Hello, Wren." Wren said, "Hi." Iris said, "Are you hungry?" Wren said, "No." Iris said, "Are you tired?" Wren said, "No." Iris said, "Do you want to come inside, or would you rather stand in the driveway?" Wren considered this. She said, "I'd rather stand in the driveway." Iris said, "Okay." And she sat down on the porch steps, and she waited. It took Wren 47 minutes to come inside. Iris waited every one of them. That summer was hard. Wren was angry. Wren was sad. Wren was 11 years old, and her parents had just blown up her life, and she didn't have the vocabulary yet for any of what she was feeling. So she fought. She fought about everything. She fought about breakfast. She fought about what time to go to bed. She fought about the dust in the workshop. She fought about the lack of cable television. She fought about the cherry trees, which she said looked creepy, and about Ardith, who she said smelled like old people. Ardith, who was 84 that summer and who had raised a daughter through scarlet fever and a marriage and a war and a widowing, took this all with the dignity of someone who had seen worse weather. Iris took it less gracefully. There was one afternoon in mid-July when Wren announced at dinner that the pile of wood out back was gross and that her grandmother was a hoarder and that all her friends would laugh if they saw it. Iris set down her fork. She said very quietly, "That is not a pile, Wren. That is an inventory." Wren said, "It's trash." Iris said, "It's wood." Wren said, "It's the factory's trash. Bill at the gas station said so." Iris said, "Bill at the gas station does not know the difference between trash and wood." Wren said, "Whatever, Grandma." And she got up, and she left the table, and she went to her room, and she slammed the door. Iris sat for a long time. Ardith reached across the table, put her hand on her daughter's hand. She said, "She's 11, Iris." Iris said, "I know." Ardith said, "She doesn't know what wood is yet." Iris said, "She might never." Ardith said, "She might." That was when Iris started doing something she had never done before. She started writing things down. Not just inventory, not just the stickered stacks and the board-foot estimates. She started writing letters to her father. Callaway Halloran had been dead since 1991, 10 years that summer. Iris had never been a writer of letters. She'd always been a worker of wood. Words were not her medium. But that night, after Wren slammed the door, Iris sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pencil, and she wrote, "Daddy, the fence next door is still there. I told you about the fence. The factory's doing well. They're wasting wood, a lot of it, more than you would believe. I'm sorting it. I think you would be proud. Margaret's girl is here this summer. Her name is Wren. She doesn't like me very much. I don't blame her. I don't know what I'm doing, Daddy. With the wood, with Wren, with any of it. But I think maybe I do know. I just don't know how to say it yet. Your daughter, Iris. She folded the letter. She put it in an envelope. She did not address it. She did not seal it. She put it in the bottom drawer of the workshop bench, underneath the catalogs and the receipts, where no one would ever find it. Then she went to bed. She wrote one of those letters every few months, for years. Some of them were short, some were 3 pages long. She told her father about the wood, about Wren growing up, about Ardith's failing eyesight, about the orders thinning, about the bills, about the small private fears she could never have spoken aloud to a living person. The letters accumulated in the drawer. She forgot mostly about some of them, but Wren did not forget. Because on a hot afternoon in early August of 2001, Wren was rummaging through the workshop looking for something to break her boredom. And she opened that drawer, and she found a letter. She didn't read all of it. She was 11. The grown-up handwriting was hard to follow. But she read enough. She read the line, "I don't know what I'm doing, Daddy," with the wood, with Wren, with any of it. She read the line, "But I think maybe I do know." And she stood there in the workshop with sawdust on her sneakers and her grandmother's handwriting in her hands, and she felt something she didn't yet have a word for. It wasn't quite shame. It wasn't quite love. It was something in between, something that connected those two feelings in a way her 11-year-old self could not articulate. She put the letter back, carefully, in the exact same place. She did not tell her grandmother she had read it. She did not tell anyone. She would not tell anyone for 11 years. But she would remember it. She would remember every word. The deliveries kept coming through the rest of 2001, through 2002, through 2003. Calvin Mosley retired from the loading dock briefly in 2003 because of a heart scare, then came back 6 months later because retirement made his wife miserable. He kept the agreement going. He never wrote it down. He never told the new managers about it, because none of them ever asked. The forklift drivers changed, the shift foreman changed, the accounts payable clerks changed. The wood kept coming over the fence, and Iris kept sorting it, and the stacks kept growing. By the autumn of 2003, Iris had accumulated an estimated 4,600 board feet of usable lumber. At market rates in 2003 dollars, that was somewhere between $9,000 and $11,000 of material. She had not built anything significant with any of it. She was waiting. She was waiting for the wood to season, to stabilize, to become what it could become. She didn't know yet what she was waiting for, but she was waiting. There is a thing that happens to a woman of a certain age, a thing nobody talks about, a thing you don't read about in books and you don't see in movies, a thing that creeps up on you in your 50s and settles in by your 60s and doesn't let you go. It is the feeling that the world has decided without consulting you that you are no longer interesting, that your hands are no longer needed, that your knowledge is no longer relevant, that the loud, fast, glittering river of human attention has flowed past you, and that you are now standing on a quiet bank in the gathering dusk with nothing to do but watch it disappear around the bend. Iris had been feeling this for years, since Tobias died, since Margaret moved away, since the workshop orders started thinning, since the day at the post office in 1998 when a young clerk had called her sweetheart in a tone that meant, "I see that you are no longer a person of consequence." The feeling had not destroyed her. She was made of harder material than that. But it had quieted her until the wood started coming over the fence, because the wood needed her. The wood needed her eyes to see which pieces were worth saving. The wood needed her hands to sort them, to sticker them, to keep them off the damp ground. The wood needed her patience, which was the one thing in the world she still had more of than anyone else she knew. Iris began to understand in those first few years that the factory had not just given her free lumber, it had given her a purpose she could not yet name, a purpose that would, 11 years later, walk into a regional manager's office in a clean work coat and present an invoice for $47,281.50. But that was 11 years away. In the autumn of 2003, the only thing Iris Halloran knew was that she had work to do, and that the wood was waiting. It was late October. The cherry trees along the fence were starting to drop their leaves. The air was sharp, the kind of New England afternoon when the sky goes hard blue and the shadows turn long and you can smell winter coming from somewhere far north. Iris was at the fence line. She was wearing her father's gloves. Her hair was up. Her back ached, because her back always ached now and she had stopped expecting it not to. A forklift had just delivered a fresh load, about 110 board feet of fir, a few sheets of birch plywood, some maple offcuts. The maple was excellent. The maple was always excellent. She was bent over, sorting, hands moving on instinct. 46 years of practice. A piece of fir, 2 by 6, 11 inches long, a small knot on one end, acceptable. She set it on the fir stack. Another piece, maple, 18 inches, clear-grained, flawless. She set it on the maple stack, carefully. Another plywood, sound, plywood pile. And then, in the middle of all this, she paused, because she had heard a footstep. She turned. Wren was standing about 10 feet away. Wren was 13 now, long-legged, awkward, wearing a t-shirt with a band logo on it that Iris didn't recognize. She was just standing there, watching. She'd been spending the weekend the way she now spent most weekends because Margaret had a new boyfriend and the new boyfriend didn't like having a teenager around. Iris said, "Hi, sweet pea." Wren said, "Hi." Iris said, "You want to help?" Wren said, "No." Iris said, "Okay." She turned back to the wood, picked up another piece, started to sort it. Wren stood there, watching. After about 3 minutes, Wren said, "Grandma?" Iris said, Wren said, "Why do you sort it like that?" Iris said, "Like what?" Wren said, "Like, by kind and by size. Why don't you just take what you want and leave the rest?" Iris paused. She looked at her granddaughter. Wren was looking back at her, not hostile, not angry, just curious. It was the first time Wren had ever asked her grandmother a question about the wood that wasn't an insult. Iris held up the piece of fir she was holding. She said, "Because, Wren, wood remembers." Wren said, "Remembers what?" Iris said, "Everything. It remembers the forest it grew in. It remembers the way the wind blew when it was a sapling. It remembers the saw that cut it down. It remembers the kiln that dried it. It remembers in its grain every choice that was ever made about it." Wren said, "Okay." Iris said, "And if I just throw it on a pile, mixed up with everything else, I'm telling it that none of that matters. I'm telling it that it's just garbage." She set the piece of fir down, gently. She said, "But it isn't garbage. None of it is. So I sort it. I give it a place. I treat it like it matters. Because it does." Wren was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandma, that's kind of weird." Iris smiled. She said, "Yes, it is." Wren stood there a little longer. Then she said, "Can I see the maple stack?" Iris said, "Yes." She walked her granddaughter over to the maple stack, showed her how the stickers worked, showed her the air gap between every layer, showed her how the wood breathed. Wren did not say much, but she did not leave for almost an hour. It would be the first hour of many. It would be, Iris would realize much later, the beginning of something. But that night, when Iris went back into the workshop, she sat down at the bench, and she took out the yellow legal pad, and she wrote one more letter. Daddy, Wren asked me about the wood today. She actually asked me. She listened to the answer. I think I'm going to build something. I don't know what yet, but I'm going to build something. And I think when I figure out what it is, I'm going to put her name on it. Your daughter, Iris. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer with the others. She closed the workshop for the night. She walked back to the house under a sky full of cold New England stars. And somewhere behind her, in the back corner of the property, 347 pieces of carefully sorted lumber sat in their stickered stacks, breathing, settling, waiting. The pile would grow. The granddaughter would grow. The fence would stay. And 11 years from this October evening, a young executive would laugh at a piece of paper. She shouldn't have. But she didn't know that yet. Nobody did. Not even Iris. Iris just knew there was work to do. And so she did it the way her father had taught her. The way her grandfather had taught her father. The way it had always been done, one piece of wood at a time. Time, in Coldwater Bend, did not move in years. It moved in seasons. It moved in the smell of the workshop on a March morning. Damp pine, cold tool steel, the faint metallic tang of dew on the hand planes. Iris would walk in at 6, open the windows, let the air do its work. It moved in the heat of July afternoons, when the workshop ceiling fan wobbled, when the sweat ran down the small of her back, when Ardith on the porch fanned herself with a folded newspaper and read mystery novels in the shade. It moved in October, the cherry trees turning, the woodpile growing, the first frost on the morning grass. It moved in February, snow on the stacks, the breath of the forklift driver in the cold, the way the wood, even buried in snowdrift, kept on doing what wood does, settling, breathing, waiting. That was how the years passed. In seasons, not in dates on a calendar, Iris built the first shed in the summer of 2005. She drew the plans at the kitchen table, graph paper, a pencil her father had owned, the kind of pencil that fit a hand that had held it for 50 years. The shed would be 12 by 24, gambrel roof, loft above. She wanted the loft because she had ideas about how to use it. Ideas she wasn't ready to say out loud yet, not even to herself. She broke ground on a Saturday in May. By her side, that morning, was Wren. Wren was 15 now, tall, thin, hair cut shorter than her grandmother liked, a piercing in her left ear that her grandmother pretended not to notice. The kind of 15-year-old who carried a paperback novel in her back pocket and rolled her eyes when adults asked what it was about. But she was there. That was the thing. She was there. She'd been there for the last 2 summers. Every weekend Margaret could spare her, which had become most weekends, because Margaret's life in Boston was, by 2005, a thing that no longer accommodated children very well. Wren had spent that time with Iris, with Ardith, and somewhere in there she had stopped fighting. She still rolled her eyes. She still wore black eye makeup that her grandmother found theatrical. She still played music that sounded to Iris like a fight inside a microwave. But she was there. And on that Saturday in May, when Iris drove the first stake into the ground for the corner of the new shed, Wren held the string for her. Iris said, "Hold it taut, sweet pea." Wren said, "I am holding it taut." Iris said, "Touter." Wren said, "Grandma, it's taut." Iris said, Wren said, "You're impossible." Iris said, "Thank you." That was how they talked now, like 2 old friends, like a married couple who'd been at it 40 years. Which was strange, because Wren was a teenager, and Iris was 67, and they had nothing in common except blood and the workshop, except that The shed went up over 6 weekends, June through July. Iris and Wren, and occasionally a young man named Eli who worked the gas station and was happy to make $12 an hour on a Saturday helping an old lady lift roof trusses. Every piece of lumber in that shed came from the pile. Not one board purchased. The 2x6 wall studs, the 2x4 headers, the 4x4 posts, the plywood sheathing, the fir rafters, all of it from the dumpster. All of it sorted, stickered, and seasoned for at least 4 years before it ever went into a wall. Iris had to buy the roofing, the hardware, the nails, the hinges for the door, but not the wood. Never the wood. When the shed was finished on a Sunday afternoon in late July, Iris and Wren stood back from it and looked at it. It was a small building, 12 by 24, modest, but it was tight. The joints were square, the roof was perfectly pitched, the siding was a patchwork of fir and pine, and the occasional plank of maple, and the patchwork did not look messy. It looked, somehow, like a quilt. Wren said, "Grandma." Iris said, Wren said, "That's actually really pretty." Iris said, "Don't sound so surprised." Wren said, "I'm not surprised, I'm just, saying it." Iris allowed herself a small smile. She said, "Yes, it is pretty." Wren said, "Can we go inside?" Iris said, "We built it. Of course we can go inside." They went inside. The shed smelled of pine and new sawdust. The light came through a small window on the south wall. The loft above them was empty, waiting. Wren walked the perimeter, ran her hand along the framing, looked up at the rafters. She said, "Grandma, did you really build all of this from the trash?" Iris said, "Wren, it isn't trash." Wren said, I know it isn't. Sorry." Iris said, "It's okay." Wren said, "I mean, from the wood." "Did you build all of it from the wood?" Iris said, "Yes." Wren said, "That's wow." Iris said, Wren said, "Does anybody else know you can do that?" Iris said, "Some people know." Wren said, "Like who?" Iris said, "Like me, like my father, like your great-grandfather who built this country house with wood he pulled out of the river after the flood of 1913. Wren said, "Oh." Iris said, "We've been doing this for a while, Sweet Pea." Wren said, "Yeah." She stood there in the new shed, hands in the pockets of her jeans, looking up at the loft, looking at the rafters, looking at her grandmother. She said, "Grandma, can I ask you something?" Iris said, "Always." Wren said, "Why don't you sell furniture to like a big store or a website? Like you could make a fortune. People would pay so much for this stuff." Iris was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Wren, selling to a big store is not the same thing as making a good piece of furniture." Wren said, "But you'd make money." Iris said, "I'd make money." Wren said, "Wouldn't that be good?" Iris said, "Sweet Pea, listen to me." Wren listened. Iris said, "There's a difference between price and value. Most people in this country, right now, have forgotten the difference. They think if something costs more, it's worth more. And if something is cheap, it's worth nothing." She paused. She said, "But that's not how the world works." Wren waited. Iris said, "A board that costs nothing because someone threw it in a dumpster can be worth more than a board that costs $200 if you know what to do with it, if you have the patience to wait for it, if you treat it right." Iris said, "That's what I'm doing here. I'm not trying to make a fortune. I'm trying to do the thing right." Wren said, "But Grandma." Iris said, "Yes." Wren said, "What if? What if you could do the thing right and also make a fortune?" Iris looked at her granddaughter. Iris said, "Wren, that would require time and help, and a real plan. Wren said, yeah. Iris said, I don't know if I have all of those. Wren said, yet. Iris said, yet. They stood there a little longer. Then they went into the house. Ardith had made lemonade. They drank it on the porch. That night, Iris wrote another letter to her father. Daddy, Wren and I built a shed. I think she is starting to see what we see. I don't know if she will keep seeing it. She is 15. The world will try to convince her of other things. But she is starting to see it. Your daughter, Iris, she put the letter in the drawer with the others. The drawer was getting full. The pile, by 2006, was the size of a small house. Iris had stopped trying to estimate the board feet. It was too many. She'd guessed, in her notebook, somewhere between 8 and 10,000 board feet. That was a fortune in lumber. That was, if she'd paid retail, more than $30,000 of material. It had cost her nothing, except her time. And her time, she had begun to understand, was the most expensive thing she owned. The pile sat in the back corner of the property, big, visible from the road. The kind of thing that made people slow down their cars and stare. People talked. Coldwater Bend was a small town. People always talked. Some of the talk was kind, some was not. There was a woman named Lorraine Pickering who lived 2 doors down who had decided in 2004 that Iris Halloran was losing it. Lorraine said this at the post office. Lorraine said this at the diner. Lorraine said this in the church basement during the Wednesday potluck. Iris is hoarding, Lorraine said. It's a sickness. My cousin in Albany had it. They had to bring in a special team to clean out her house. It's the same thing. You watch. People listened to Lorraine. Lorraine was loud, and Lorraine was confident, and Lorraine had nothing else to do. Iris knew what Lorraine was saying. She knew because Ardith's hairdresser had told Ardith, and Ardith had told Iris reluctantly over breakfast. With her hand on her daughter's, Iris had said, Mama, it doesn't matter. Ardith had said, it matters. Iris had said, Mama, let it go. Ardith had said, they don't see what you're doing. Iris had said, I know. Ardith had said, they will see one day. Iris had said, maybe, but it bothered her. She wouldn't admit it. Not even to Wren, but it bothered her. Because there is a particular pain that comes from being misunderstood by the place you've lived in for 67 years. From having the people you've stood next to in church pews and grocery aisles and parent-teacher meetings decide, without asking, that you have become a type, a story. The eccentric widow at the edge of town, the hoarder, the lonely woman with the woodpile. Iris felt that pain. She kept working anyway, but she felt it. Then, on a Thursday afternoon in October of 2006, a black Lincoln pulled into her driveway. Iris was in the workshop. She heard the car, the crunch of gravel, the low purr of an engine that did not belong to anyone she knew. She wiped her hands on her apron, walked to the door, looked out. A man was getting out of the car, tall, maybe 60, camel hair coat, leather gloves, the kind of glasses that cost more than her monthly grocery bill. He looked at the workshop, then at the house, then at the pile of wood in the back. He saw Iris in the doorway. He raised a gloved hand. He said, Ma'am, my name is Theron Whitcomb. I'm looking for Iris Halloran. Iris said, You found her. Theron Whitcomb walked across the gravel to the workshop door. He took off his right glove and offered his hand. Iris took it. His hand was soft, the hand of a man who had not held a tool in 30 years. He said, Mrs. Halloran, I'm sorry to come unannounced. I drove up from Portland this morning. I run a furniture company. High-end custom work, built-ins, cabinetry, heirloom dining tables. I have a showroom on Newbury Street in Boston. and another in Manhattan. Iris waited. Theron said, I'm told you have an inventory of lumber here that is unusual. Iris said, told by whom? Theron said, a friend of mine. Lives in Burlington. He's been driving past your property for 2 years and finally mentioned it to me. He said, forgive me. He said it looked like a hoarder's nightmare, but that the back of it, he said you can see from the back that there's something underneath, something organized. He said he thought it might be wood. Iris said, it is wood. Theron said, may I see it? Iris said, why? Theron smiled. He said, because, Mrs. Halloran, I would like, possibly, to make you an offer. Iris stood there for a long moment. Then she said, take off your nice shoes. Put on those old boots by the door. We'll walk. She showed him the stacks. She showed him the fir, the maple, the oak. She showed him the way the wood was stickered, the air gaps, the notebook. She showed him the firewood pile, neat, cross-hatched, 6 feet high. She showed him the shed she'd built. Theron Whitcomb walked through it all in complete silence. He stopped at one point. In front of a stack of laminated maple, he reached out, touched a piece, bent down, smelled it, closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes, he said, Mrs. Halloran, this is air-dried maple, stickered for, what, 4 years? 5? Iris said, that stack is from 2002. It's been stickered 4 years. Theron said, and the species are sorted by dimension, by date? Iris said, yes. Theron said, and the firewood is separated? Iris said, yes. Theron said, Mrs. Halloran, this is the finest small lumber inventory I have seen in 20 years. Iris said, thank you. Theron said, I want to buy it. Iris waited. Theron said, all of it. Iris said, all of it. Theron said, $85,000. Cash. I'll have a truck here in 2 weeks. The number landed in the cold October air between them. $85,000. Iris had not made $85,000 in any single year of her life. She thought in that moment about Ardith, about the property taxes that were due in January, about the workshop which still leaked over the south corner because she'd been putting off the roof repair, about Margaret in Boston, who was now living with a different man and had her own financial problems, about Wren, who would be applying to colleges in a year or two and would need help. $85,000 would solve all of that. For a long while, Iris looked at Theron Whitcomb. She looked at her stacks. She looked at the workshop where her father had built things and her grandfather before him. She looked at the empty loft of the new shed, and she said, no. Theron blinked. He said, I'm sorry. Iris said, no, Mr. Whitcomb, I'm not selling. Theron said, Mrs. Halloran, forgive me. Did I name the wrong number? Because I can. Iris said, you named a generous number. It isn't about the number. Theron said, I don't understand. Iris said, the wood isn't ready. Theron said, Mrs. Halloran, with all respect, that maple is 4 years stickered. That fir is 6. They are perfectly ready. Iris said, the wood isn't ready, Mr. Whitcomb. She paused. She said, and neither am I. He looked at her for a long time, then he nodded, slowly, like a man recognizing something he had not expected to find in Coldwater Bend, Vermont. He reached into his coat pocket, took out a business card, handed it to her. He said, Mrs. Halloran, when you are ready, or when the wood is ready, whichever happens first, please call me. He paused. He said, I will not lower the offer. Iris took the card, tucked it into her apron. She said, thank you, Mr. Whitcomb. He drove away in the black Lincoln. The dust from the gravel hung in the air for a long time after he'd gone. That night, Iris took out the legal pad. Daddy, A man came today. He offered me $85,000 for the wood. I said no. I don't know if I was right, but I think I was, because I haven't built it yet, and I think I have to build it with my own hands, the way you would have. Otherwise, what was any of this for? Your daughter, Iris. She folded the letter. She put it in the drawer. She did not tell Wren about Theron Whitcomb for almost 5 years. She did not tell anyone. She kept his card in her apron pocket, and over time the card grew soft and worn, the corners rounded by the rubbing against the canvas, the ink fading. But she kept it. She kept it. In the spring of 2008, Calvin Mosley came over the fence. Not literally. He walked around, through the visitor's gate at the front of the factory, down the county road, up Iris's driveway. It was a Saturday. He was wearing street clothes. He was 63 years old, and the limp in his left leg was worse than it had been 8 years ago. Iris saw him from the workshop window, walked out to meet him. He took off his hat. He said, "Mrs. Halloran." She said, "Calvin." He said, "Can I sit a minute?" She said, "Of course." They sat on the porch. Ardith brought iced tea, then disappeared back inside, the way Ardith always disappeared at the right moments. Ardith had a sense for when conversations needed 2 chairs and an empty third one. Calvin held the iced tea in both hands. He said, "Mrs. Halloran, I've got some news." Iris waited. Calvin said, "I went to the doctor last month. They found something in my heart. The kind of something that, well, they're saying I should retire soon." Iris said, "Oh, Calvin." Calvin said, "I'm okay. I am. They caught it early. I'm not. I'm not going anywhere fast. But the doctor says, no more loading dock. No more 12-hour days. He's right. I know he's right." Iris said, "I'm so sorry." Calvin said, He took a sip of iced tea. He said, "Mrs. Halloran, I came over because I want to give you something." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. He took out a small leather notebook, brown, worn, about the size of a paperback, the kind of notebook you bought at a hardware store and kept in your back pocket. He set it on the table between them. He said, "I've been keeping this since 2001. Iris looked at the notebook. Calvin said, "Every time I sent a load over the fence, I wrote it down. Date, estimated board feet, species, when I could tell. Sometimes I wrote down other stuff. What kind of mood I was in, what the weather was like, whether your cherry trees were blooming." Iris was very still. Calvin said, "I don't know why I did it. I really don't. It wasn't for any reason. There was nobody. Nobody asked me to. Nobody would have ever seen it." He paused. He said, "But I think part of me knew that what we were doing was worth remembering. I knew that you were doing something over here with that wood. And I didn't know what. But I knew. It wasn't nothing." Iris looked at him. Calvin said, "And I knew that one day someone might care, that somebody wrote it down." He pushed the notebook across the table. He said, "I want you to have it." Iris did not pick up the notebook immediately. She looked at it. Then she looked at Calvin Mosley, a man she had never had a meal with, never been in his home, never met his wife. A man who had been, for 8 years, simply the figure on the other side of the fence. The man who shrugged and said, "Take what you want." She said, "Calvin, why?" Calvin said, "Because, ma'am, I've watched you for 8 years, from my office window, from the loading dock. I've seen you out there with that wood, sorting, stacking, year after year." He paused. He said, "My grandfather was a furniture maker. Did I ever tell you that?" Iris said, "No." Calvin said, "He had a shop in Brattleboro, made dining tables, mostly cherry. He died when I was 12. I never I never learned from him. I always regretted that. He looked at his hands. He said, watching you, out there, with the wood. It was like, it was like I was getting to see what he had done with his life. The thing I never got to learn. He paused. He said, so I kept the notebook because somebody should have, because the work was worth keeping a record of. Iris reached out. She picked up the notebook. It was heavier than it looked. She opened the cover. Calvin's handwriting was on the first page. Date, the 14th of November, 2001. 6 pieces of fur, 2 by 8, approximately 40 board feet. Cold morning, first frost. She turned the page. Another entry, November 16. 8 pieces of fir, 12 pieces of laminated maple, approximately 110 board feet. Mrs. Halloran was out there in her father's gloves. I waved. She didn't wave back. She was concentrating. Iris closed the notebook. She held it against her chest. She said, Calvin. Calvin said, ma'am. She said, thank you. Calvin said, you don't have to thank me, ma'am. She said, I do. Calvin said, well, you're welcome. He stood up. He put his hat back on. He said, I won't be at the factory much longer. They're bringing in some new people, new management, new systems. Well, he looked at the fence. He said, I don't know what's going to happen, Mrs. Halloran, with the deliveries after I'm gone. Iris said, I'll figure it out. Calvin said, you always do. He walked back down the driveway. She watched him go. Calvin Mosley died 7 months later, November of 2008, a heart attack on a Sunday morning. He was found by his wife in the kitchen, the coffee still brewing. Iris drove to the funeral. She sat in the back of the church. She did not know anyone. She wore her good dress, the one she had worn to Tobias's funeral 25 years before. When the service was over, she walked out without speaking to anyone. The next morning she wrote, Daddy, Calvin Mosley died. He gave me a notebook before he passed. It's a record of every load of wood he ever sent over the fence. I don't know why, but I think it might be important one day. I'm keeping it in the safe. Your daughter Iris, she put the letter in the drawer. She put the notebook in the small fireproof safe under her workbench. She did not know then exactly what the notebook would come to mean. But she had a feeling. She had begun to have a feeling. Ardith Halloran died in the spring of 2010. She was 93 years old. It happened at home, in the sunroom. She was sitting in her chair. The afternoon light was coming through the window. She had a mystery novel open on her lap. Iris had brought her a cup of chamomile tea. Iris had stepped out for 2 minutes, to get the mail from the box at the end of the driveway. When she came back, Ardith was gone. There had been no fall, no struggle, no final pain. She had simply put down the book. Or maybe she hadn't even put it down. The book had still been open to page 142. Iris stood in the doorway of the sunroom. She did not move for a long time. Then she walked to her mother. She knelt beside the chair. She took her mother's hand. The hand was already cool. Iris said, Mama. She did not cry. Not then. She would cry later. In the workshop, in the dark, alone. But at that moment, in the sunroom, with the spring light coming through the window, she just held her mother's hand, and she said, very quietly, I love you, Mama. I love you so much. I'm so sorry I left you for 2 minutes. Then she called the doctor. The funeral was on a Friday. Half of Coldwater Bend came. People Iris had not seen in years. People who had grown up in town and moved away and come back for this. Ardith Halloran had been beloved. Wren came home from college. She was 19, a sophomore at Northeastern, business major. She stood next to her grandmother at the graveside. Iris did not speak at the service. She had asked the pastor to. She did not trust her own voice. But that night, in the kitchen, after everyone had left, Wren sat down next to her grandmother at the table. Wren said, "Grandma." Iris said, "Yes." Wren said, "I think I want to come home this summer, for real, not just weekends." Iris said, "You have classes." Wren said, "I can take the summer off," or "I can transfer somewhere," or "I don't know, I want to be here." Iris said, "Sweet pea." Wren said, "I'm serious, Grandma. I want to learn. The wood, the workshop, all of it. I want to learn what you know." Iris looked at her granddaughter. Wren was 19 years old. She had cut her hair shorter again. She had stopped wearing the black eye makeup years ago. She was somehow the spitting image of Ardith at the same age. The cheekbones, the way she held her chin. Iris said, "Wren, you don't have to do this for me." Wren said, "I'm not doing it for you, Grandma." Iris said, "Why are you doing it?" Wren said, because, Mama, great-grandma, she always told me." She said, "Wren, there are two kinds of people in this world, the kind who watch the river, and the kind who build the bridge." And she said, "I think you might be the second kind, but you won't know unless you try." Iris said, "She told you that?" Wren said, "Yes." Iris said, "When?" Wren said, "Last summer. She told me a lot of things last summer. I think she knew." Iris closed her eyes. She said, "Wren?" Wren said, "Yes." Iris said, "Come home for the summer. Just the summer. We'll see how it feels." Wren said, "Okay." That summer, Wren learned to use the table saw, the jointer, the hand planes. She learned to read grain. She learned to sticker a stack. She learned to listen to wood, the way her great-grandfather and her great-great-grandfather had taught it, generation after generation. She was, Iris realized, good. Not just willing, not just dutiful. Good, the way Iris had been at the same age, the way maybe her father had been. Iris started that summer to think about something she had not let herself think about before. She started to think about the future. The factory, by then, was changing. Northbridge Timber was no longer owned by the same people. There had been an acquisition. A larger conglomerate had bought it in late 2010. The new owners were based in Chicago. They had 18 other facilities. The deliveries kept coming through the spring, through the summer, through the fall. But by October of 2010, things had begun to feel different. The forklift drivers were new. The shift foremen were new. The faces in the windows of the factory office were faces Iris did not recognize. Calvin's notebook was in her safe. She had a feeling. The feeling was something was coming. She did not know what, but it was coming. That fall, she did something she had not done before. She started buying machines. Old machines, cheap, tired, the kind nobody wanted. A 1950s Delta table saw at a farm auction in Williston. $300, 5-horsepower motor, cast iron, heavier than her car. A 24-inch jointer from a high school shop in Rutland that was closing down, $500. The principal threw in a dust collection hood for free. A bandsaw, a drill press, a spindle sander, a planer. She bought them with her own savings, plus the small inheritance Ardith had left her, which was not large, but which was enough. She brought the machines home on a borrowed flatbed trailer, one at a time. Over 6 months. She paid Eli, the gas station boy, who was now a young man with a wife, $20 an hour to help her unload them. She did not put the machines in the workshop. She put them in the shed, the first shed she'd built. With Wren, in 2005, she wired electricity to the shed in November of 2010, hired an electrician from Stowe, $800. The electrician asked her what she planned to do with so much power running out to a shed. Iris said, "I'm going to make some sawdust." The electrician said, "Ma'am, with this much amperage, you could light up a department store." Iris said, "I know." She did not tell anyone what she was doing. Not Wren, not anyone. She just worked every night, after dinner, after the news, after the dishes. She would walk out to the shed, turn on the light, and work on the machines. She rebuilt the Delta table saw. New bearings, new belt, new blade. She got the cast iron table flat to within 1/1000th of an inch. She rebuilt the jointer, tuned the knives, squared the fence. She rebuilt the bandsaw, the drill press, the planer. By the spring of 2011, she had a fully functioning small mill in the shed she had built 6 years earlier from the factory's trash. Nobody knew. Not Wren, not Margaret, not anyone in Coldwater Bend. Just Iris. In the spring of 2011, the call came. Iris was in the workshop, working on a small jewelry box she was making for Wren's 21st birthday, which was coming up in May. The phone rang. She picked up. A voice said, "Mrs. Halloran, this is Delphine Voss. I'm the new Regional Operations Manager at Northbridge Timber. I'd like to come over and speak with you about a small matter concerning our 2 properties." Iris said, "When?" Delphine said, "Today, if possible. I'm here until 5. Iris said, 3 o'clock. Delphine said, 3 o'clock works perfectly. She hung up. Iris set down the chisel she had been holding. She walked to the workshop window. She looked out at the fence. She looked at the back corner of the property where the pile sat. 11,000 board feet of beautiful, stickered, seasoned lumber, hidden in plain sight. The messy-looking face of it concealing a treasure underneath. She said very quietly, to nobody, "Here we go." Delphine Voss arrived at 3 o'clock exactly. She was driving a silver SUV. She was wearing a crisp blue button-down, no tie, khaki pants, boots that had never seen mud. She was 34 years old. She had an MBA from Wharton. She was a certified Six Sigma black belt. She had been the regional manager at Northbridge for exactly 6 weeks. She had not, in all that time, met the woman who lived next door. Iris opened the door before Delphine could knock. Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran, thank you for seeing me." Iris said, "Come in." Delphine stepped into the kitchen, looked around. The kitchen was old. Yellow linoleum, white cabinets that had been white for 30 years, a photograph of Callaway Halloran on the wall above the stove. Delphine said, "Beautiful home." Iris said, "It's an old home." Delphine said, "Older homes have character." Iris said, She gestured to a chair. Delphine sat. Iris poured 2 cups of coffee, set them on the table, sat down across from the young woman. Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran, I'll get straight to it." Iris said, "Please do." Delphine said, "I've been reviewing the disposal procedures at our facility. It appears that for some time we have been disposing of wood offcuts by depositing them on your property." Iris said, "Yes." Delphine said, "This is, you understand, a highly irregular arrangement. There's no contract, no insurance, no documentation. From a liability standpoint, it's a nightmare." Iris said, Delphine said, "I'm here to formalize it." Iris said, "Formalize it." Delphine said, "We'd like to enter into a lease agreement with you. We would pay you $100 per month to use the back corner of your property as a designated debris staging area. We would handle all of the material. All you would have to do is cash the check. She smiled. It was a confident smile, a practice smile, the kind of smile that had closed deals in conference rooms in Manhattan and Atlanta and Chicago. She thought she was offering this woman a small windfall. Iris stirred her coffee. She said, "The wood isn't debris, Miss Voss." Delphine's smile tightened slightly. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, with respect, it's a waste product. We pay $1,500 a month to have it hauled to a landfill. I'm offering you $1,200 a year to keep it here instead. It's a win for both of us." Iris said, "It's lumber." Delphine said, "Excuse me?" Iris said, "It isn't debris. It isn't waste. It's lumber." Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran, I assure you, from our perspective, it's waste." Iris said, "Yes, Miss Voss, that's the problem." There was a small silence. Delphine shifted in her chair. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, let me put this another way. I'm trying to do you a favor." Iris said, "I appreciate that." Delphine said, "But if we can't reach an agreement, then I have to stop the deliveries entirely. I'll contract with our hauler to put a dedicated dumpster on our own lot. It'll cost the company $1,500 a month, but it's clean. It's auditable. It's the cost of doing business." She paused. She said, "And, Mrs. Halloran, the existing pile on your property. It's a safety hazard. The town has ordinances. You'd need to have it cleared." Iris looked at the young woman across from her. She looked at her for a long moment. She saw the crisp shirt, the MBA, the Six Sigma certification, the smile that had stopped being a smile and become a thin professional line. She also saw something else, something underneath. She saw a young woman who was working very, very hard, who had something to prove, who had not, perhaps, slept well in a long time. Iris saw all of that. She did not say anything about it. She just said, "Miss Voss, the answer is no." Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran." Iris said, "Thank you for the offer, but the answer is no." Delphine said, "You'll have to clean up the pile." Iris said, "I'll handle the pile, Miss Voss." Delphine said, "You have 30 days. I'll be sending a certified letter tomorrow morning." Iris said, "I look forward to receiving it." Delphine stood up. She had not touched her coffee. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, I have to say, I don't understand why you're making this so difficult." Iris said, "I'm not making anything difficult, Miss Voss." Delphine said, "You're refusing free money." Iris said, "I'm refusing to call my lumber your trash." The young woman stared at her. For just a moment, something in Delphine Voss's face flickered. Something that did not belong to the Wharton MBA, or the Six Sigma certification, or the stopwatch in her pocket. Something younger, something tired, something Iris recognized suddenly with a small, quiet jolt. Then it was gone. Delphine said, "I'll see myself out." She did. The silver SUV reversed down the driveway, pulled onto the county road, drove away. Iris sat at the kitchen table. She looked at the untouched cup of coffee on the other side of the table. She thought about her father. She thought about Calvin Mosley's notebook in the safe. She thought about the shed and the machines and the 11,000 board feet of lumber waiting in the back of the property. She thought, "Daddy, they came. They finally came." She thought, "I'm going to need help." She picked up the phone. She dialed Wren's number at school. Wren picked up on the third ring. Wren said, "Grandma?" Iris said, "Sweet pea." Wren said, "Are you okay?" Iris said, "I'm fine." Wren said, "What's wrong?" Iris said, "I need you to come home." Wren said, "When?" Iris said, "This weekend, and then, maybe, for a while." Wren said, "Grandma, what's going on?" Iris said, "I'll tell you when you get here." Wren said, "Okay." Iris said, "Wren?" Wren said, "Yes." Iris said, "Do you remember when you asked me, in the new shed, what if you could do the thing right? And also, make a fortune?" Wren said, "Yeah." Iris said, "I think the time has come, Sweet Pea, to find out if you can." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Wren said, "I'll be there Saturday morning." Iris said, "I love you, Wren." Wren said, "I love you too, Grandma." Iris hung up. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The afternoon light moved across the linoleum. The clock on the wall ticked. Somewhere outside, the cherry trees were starting to bud. Iris Halloran took a sip of her cold coffee, and she smiled. Wren arrived on Saturday morning at 8:47 a.m. She drove a 15-year-old Honda that her mother had given her when she'd started college. The Honda had a cracked tail light, a bumper sticker that said Northeastern Husky Pride, a duffel bag in the passenger seat that contained, in the order she had packed it, 3 pairs of jeans, 2 flannel shirts, her grandfather's old leather gloves, which Iris had given her for her 16th birthday, a paperback copy of Middlemarch, and a checkbook. She had not slept much on the drive up. She had thought instead about her grandmother's voice on the phone, about what for a while might mean, about the spring semester she was about to walk away from without telling her advisor, about the look on her mother's face when she'd called her late Thursday night and said, "Mom, I'm going to Grandma's. I don't know when I'm coming back." Margaret had not protested. Margaret had said, "Okay." Margaret had said, "Take care of her, Wren." Margaret had said, "I never could." And then she had hung up. Wren had stared at her phone for a long time. Then she had packed. She pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, sat for a moment. She looked at the farmhouse, the white clapboard, the green tin roof, the workshop out back, the line of cherry trees along the fence, the shed she had helped build when she was 15. She looked at the back corner of the property, where the pile should have been, for a moment, just a moment. Her heart did something strange, because the pile looked different, somehow, even from here. She got out of the car. Iris was already on the porch. She was wearing her canvas work coat, her father's gloves, her hair pinned back, the way she pinned it back when there was real work ahead. Wren said, "Grandma." Iris said, "Sweet Pea." They held each other for a long time. Wren said, "I don't even have a plan." Iris said, "I do." Wren said, "Okay." Iris said, "Come inside. Have coffee. Then I'm going to show you something." The shed. That was what Iris showed her. The shed that Wren had helped build when she was 15. The little gambrel roofed building she had thought all those years was just for storage. Iris unlocked the side door. She said, "Wren, step inside." Wren stepped inside. She did not speak for almost a minute because the inside of the shed was no longer a shed. It was a workshop, a real workshop. The Delta table saw sat in the middle of the floor, restored, gleaming. A clean concrete pad underneath it that Iris had poured the previous fall, hiring a contractor from Stowe because she could not pour concrete at her age. Could not. But the rest she had done herself. The 24-inch jointer along the south wall, tuned, squared, the cast iron freshly waxed, the band saw, the drill press, the planer, the spindle sander, each one in its own carefully chosen position. Overhead, a dust collection system, the piping running along the rafters, branching down to each machine. And against the north wall was a workbench, not a workbench Wren had ever seen before. A new workbench, massive, 8 feet long, maple top, 4 inches thick. The kind of bench that, in a furniture catalog, would cost $6,000. Iris had built it from the laminated maple offcuts over the winter. In secret, Ren said, Grandma. Iris said, Ren said, Grandma. Iris said, yes. Ren said, what have you? What have you been doing? Iris said, I've been getting ready, sweet pea. Ren said, for what? Iris said, for this. She turned, looked her granddaughter in the eye. She said, Ren, there's a young woman over at the factory. She came here on Thursday. She told me she's stopping the deliveries. She told me I have 30 days to clean up the pile, or she's calling the town code enforcement. Ren said, what? Iris said she offered me $100 a month to lease the back of my property. I said no. Ren said, Grandma? Iris said, I know what you're going to say. Ren said, $100 a month, Grandma. That's $1,200 a year for literally nothing. Iris said, for literally everything, sweet pea. Ren said, I don't. Iris said, I'm going to send her a bill. Ren said, what? Iris said, for storage, for sorting, for curation, for 11 years. Ren said, Grandma. Iris said, I want you to help me calculate it. Ren stared at her grandmother, the granddaughter who, 2 years before, had asked the question, what if you could do the thing right, and also make a fortune? The granddaughter who was, suddenly, looking at the answer. She said, how much? Iris said, I think, maybe, $45,000, 47, something like that. Ren said, you're going to send a $47,000 bill. Iris said, yes. Ren said, to a major corporation. Iris said, yes. Ren said, that you have no contract with. Iris said, I have something better than a contract. She walked across the shed. She knelt down, opened the small fireproof safe she had bolted to the floor underneath the new workbench. She took out the leather notebook. She handed it to Ren. She said, Calvin Mosley kept this for 8 years. Every load, every date, every estimate, every species he could identify. Ren opened the notebook, turned a page, turned another. Her eyes moved fast. She said, Grandma. Iris said, Ren said, Grandma, this is... Iris said, Ren said, this is everything. Iris said, yes. Ren said, this. With your own notebook, with the actual physical inventory in the second shed, you could. She stopped. Iris said, go on. Ren said, you could actually prove it. Iris said, I know. Ren said, Grandma, this isn't even close to a wild claim. This is documentable. Iris said, I know. Ren sat down on a small stool next to the workbench. She said, okay, sorry, I'm a business major. Give me a second, let me think. Iris said, take your time, sweet pea. Ren said, their disposal cost is $1,500 a month over 11 years. That's $198,000 they would have spent if they hadn't been dumping here. Iris said, yes. Ren said, so 47,000 is less than 25% of what we saved them. Iris said, yes. Ren said, it's defensible. Even if they push back, even if they try to argue 47 is fair, it's almost generous. Iris said, yes. Ren said, Grandma, wait. Iris said, yes. Ren said, what? What about the second shed? The bigger one. You said we have to clear the pile in 30 days. Iris said, we do. Ren said, where is it going? Iris said, where it has always been going, sweet pea. Inside. Ren said, Grandma, we have 11,000 board feet of wood in 30 days. We have to. She stopped. She breathed. She said, okay. She said, okay. She said, I'm in. She put down the notebook, stood up, looked at her grandmother. She said, "What do we do first?" The second shed was already built. That was the thing. Iris had not told her, but it was already built. She had built it the previous summer. With a small crew, 3 young men from a local timber framing company. They had come for 2 weeks. They had charged her $17,000. She had paid them out of Ardith's small inheritance. The new building was 30 feet by 50 feet behind the workshop, hidden from the road by the line of cherry trees, hidden from Wren by the fact that Wren had not been home for 6 months. It was an empty barn, big, bright, floor to ceiling. Iris led Wren over to it, opened the side door. Wren stepped inside. She said, "Grandma, oh my God." Iris said, Wren said, "Grandma, this is huge." Iris said, Wren said, "When did you? How did you? Without me knowing?" Iris said, "You were at school, sweet pea. You don't see everything." Wren said, "Grandma, this is a real mill. This is a real lumber operation." Iris said, "It will be." Wren turned to her grandmother. She said, "You've been planning this." Iris said, "Yes." Wren said, "For how long?" Iris said, 11 years. The numbers were the easy part. The work was not. Wren did the math first. Saturday night, at the kitchen table, with Calvin's notebook open on one side, Iris's own notebook on the other, a calculator from the workshop drawer. She calculated the total board feet delivered between November of 2000 and October of 2011. She used Calvin's records for the years he'd recorded and Iris's own estimates for the others. The total came out to approximately 57,000 board feet, of which Iris had set aside maybe 11,000 as premium stock. The rest had become firewood, had warped, had been used in small projects, had been given to neighbors, had been gradually consumed by 11 years of patient use. Wren looked at the market price of comparable lumber, used Northbridge's own annual reports, which were publicly available because they were a subsidiary of a publicly traded conglomerate, found the wholesale cost of Douglas fir, of maple, of laminated stock. She discounted by 50% for the smaller dimensions, for the fact that the offcuts were a less organized inventory than a fresh mill order. She came out at a number, $47,281.50. She added the 50 cents because she said, "Grandma, round numbers look like guesses. Numbers with cents look like math. We want this to look like math." Iris said, "Yes." Wren typed the invoice on the laptop she had brought from school, printed it on cream-colored paper that Iris kept in the workshop for special occasions, the kind of paper her father had used for his own invoices back when he had still been writing them. She gave the printed invoice to her grandmother. Iris read it. Iris said, "Yes, that's the one." She sealed it in a cream-colored envelope. She wrote in her steady architectural script on the front, "Miss Delphine Voss, Regional Operations Manager, Northbridge Timber." She set the envelope on the corner of the kitchen table. It sat there for 3 weeks. While the work happened, the clearing of the pile was the hard part. That was what Iris had told her granddaughter. What she had not told her was that the pile was, after 11 years, mostly already cleared, because Iris had been moving it for 3 years, quietly, a wheelbarrow load at a time, into the new shed, stacked, stickered, indexed, cataloged. The pile that the world saw, the pile that the town gossiped about, the pile that Delphine Voss had threatened to call the code enforcement officer about. The pile was a facade, a messy, chaotic-looking face on top of a stockpile that had for years been steadily migrating indoors. What was left at the fence line, by the time Delphine sent her certified letter on the Monday after their meeting, was maybe 2,000 board feet of raw, unsorted material, recent deliveries. Stuff Iris had not yet processed. And the firewood pile, and a great deal of dust and gravel and small chips of wood that the forklift had ground into the soil over 11 years. Iris and Wren and a young man named Theo, the new gas station boy who had taken over from Eli's older cousin, spent 26 days clearing the rest. They worked from sunup to sundown. They moved the recent material into the new shed. They sorted it, sticker by sticker, species by species, dimension by dimension. The firewood went into a covered woodshed Iris had also quietly built behind the workshop the previous fall. The dust and gravel and chips, the pulverized remains of a decade of dumping. Iris and Wren raked them, loaded them into a borrowed dump truck, hauled them to a county composting facility, where the wood became, in a few months, soil. The same way wood always becomes soil. In the end, Iris liked that part. She liked that part very much. On the afternoon of the 31st of October 2011, the 30-day deadline, the pile was gone. The back corner of the property was bare, a patch of disturbed earth, a few scraps of bark, nothing else. Mark down the date. Mark the silence, because from the windows of Northbridge Timber, looking south across the fence, the view was clean. Delphine Voss stood at her office window that afternoon. At about 4 o'clock, she watched the last of the daylight rake across the property line. She saw the bare earth where, for 11 years, there had been a small mountain of debris. She said to nobody in particular, well, she did it. She felt a small, complicated thing. She felt, on the one hand, relief. She felt, on the other hand, something she couldn't name, something quieter, something that felt, if she had let herself notice it, almost like disappointment, as though some part of her had been hoping the old woman would have refused, would have made her actually call the town, would have given her a reason to feel like the villain, because if you are the villain, then at least you know what role you are playing. Delphine turned away from the window. She picked up her tablet. She made a note in her project tracker. Halloran Property Remediation. Confirmed, cleared. October 31, closed. She thought about going home. She thought about her empty apartment in Burlington, the takeout she would order, the reports she would read until midnight. She thought, tomorrow is November 1st. New month. Fresh start. She did not know that tomorrow was not a fresh start. Tomorrow was something else. Iris Halloran walked across the parking lot of Northbridge Timber at 8:53 a.m. on Tuesday, the 1st of November 2011. She was wearing her good work coat, the clean one. Her hair was pinned back. Her boots were polished. In her right hand, she carried the cream-colored envelope. In her left hand, she carried a small leather tote that contained a copy of the invoice, Calvin Moseley's notebook, her own notebook, and the printout of the calculations Wren had made. She walked past 2 trucks idling at the loading dock. She walked past 3 workers in hard hats who looked at her curiously. She walked into the front lobby of the office building. The receptionist looked up. The receptionist said, "Can I help you, ma'am?" Iris said, "I'd like to see Miss Delphine Voss." The receptionist said, "Do you have an appointment?" Iris said, "No." The receptionist said, "I'm sorry, ma'am. Miss Voss is in meetings this morning. I can take a message." Iris said, "Please tell her that Iris Halloran is here from next door with a delivery." The receptionist hesitated, picked up the phone, said something quietly into it, listened, said something else, listened, then said, "Mrs. Halloran, Miss Voss will see you. Right this way." The walk down the hallway was long. Polished concrete, white walls, photographs of finished projects on every wall, lake houses, office buildings, corporate retreats, the structures that Northbridge Timbers beams had ended up inside. Iris noticed, she noticed, that none of the photographs showed people. The lake houses were empty, the office buildings were empty, the corporate retreats were empty. It was an entire wall of buildings without anyone in them. Iris thought, very briefly, that tells you something about this place. Then she stopped thinking it, because she had arrived at the door. Delphine's office. The receptionist knocked, opened the door, said, "Miss Voss, Mrs. Halloran is here." Iris stepped in. Delphine was standing behind her desk. She had not sat down. She had not finished her coffee. She looked surprised, mildly, professionally, the kind of surprise that an MBA learns to perform. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, this is unexpected." Iris said, "I'm sorry to come without an appointment." Delphine said, "Not at all. Please, sit." Iris said, "I won't take much of your time." She walked to the desk. She set the cream-colored envelope on it. She said, "I believe this is in order." Delphine looked at the envelope, looked at Iris, picked it up, opened it, took out the single piece of paper inside. She read it. She read it twice. She set it down. She laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Not cruel, just the reflexive laugh of a person whose brain has been handed something it does not know how to process. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, is this a joke?" Iris said, "It is not a joke." Delphine said, "You're invoicing us." Iris said, "Yes." Delphine said, "For $47,000. Iris said, $47,281.50. Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran." Iris said, "Miss Voss, you told me 3 weeks ago that the wood you have been dumping on my property is waste, that it would have cost your company $1,500 a month to dispose of it through your hauler, that over 11 years that is $198,000 your company would have spent." Iris said, "I saved you that money." Iris said, "I am charging you less than 25% of what I saved you." Iris said, "I believe that is fair." Delphine sat down, slowly. She did not pick up the invoice. She looked at it, on her desk, the cream paper bright against the dark wood. She said, "Mrs. Halloran, with respect, we had an arrangement that you could take the wood for free. We did not enter into any contract for storage services." Iris said, "You are correct, Miss Voss. We had an arrangement that I could use the wood, and I have." She paused. She reached into her tote. She took out not the notebook, but a small object, a hand-carved wooden key. She set it on the desk. She said, "I would like to invite you to come see how I have used it." Delphine looked at the key. The key was about 3 inches long. It was carved from a single piece of maple. The teeth were intricate. The bow was decorated with a small inlaid letter H. It was clearly not a functional key. It was a gesture. Delphine looked at Iris for a long moment. Then, against her better judgment, against every instinct in her Six Sigma training, against the voice in her head that was screaming, "Get the lawyers on the phone now," she said, "All right, show me." They walked across the parking lot. They walked through the gate. They walked along the line where the chain link fence ran. Delphine had not been on Iris's side of the fence before. She had seen it from her office, from her car, from the satellite images on her tablet, but she had never walked it. It looked different from the ground. It looked smaller, closer, more human. The cherry trees were bare. The autumn light came through the branches in long bands. Iris said nothing. Delphine said nothing. They walked until they came to the new barn, 30 by 50, cedar siding, standing seam metal roof. On the front of the barn, above the main sliding doors, a new sign, made from a single beautiful piece of laminated Douglas fir, 3 feet wide, 10 feet long. The letters carved in a classic, powerful font. Halloran and granddaughter custom millwork. Delphine stopped walking. She read the sign. She did not move for a moment. Iris walked past her to the small side door, unlocked it with an actual key, not the carved one. She said, "After you, Miss Voss." Delphine stepped inside. She stood in the doorway for a long time. The light came through the high windows, fell on the concrete floor. The machines stood in their positions, the Delta table saw in the center, the jointer along the south wall, the band saw, the drill press, the planer, the spindle sander, the dust collection piping along the rafters, and to the left and right, filling the side wings, were the stacks, stickered, cataloged, towering, the libraries of lumber that Iris had built up in secret over 11 patient years. Fir, maple, oak, pine, plywood, hardwood, blocks, reclaimed beams, easily, 11,000 board feet, maybe more. Delphine took 2 steps inside. She stopped. She looked. Her hand, without her thinking about it, came up to her mouth. She said very softly, "Oh." Iris waited. Delphine walked further in. She walked past the table saw. She ran a finger along the cast iron. The iron was clean, polished, hand-waxed. She walked to the maple stack, the big one, the one that was 4 years stickered. She bent down, smelled it. She straightened up. She looked at Iris. She said, "Mrs. Halloran." Iris said, "Yes." Delphine said, "This is." She did not finish the sentence. Iris said, "Yes." Delphine said, "How long?" Iris said, "I have been gathering it for 11 years. I have been building this mill for about 3. Delphine said, You built this." Iris said, "Most of it, with help where I needed it. But the wood, yes, I gathered every piece." Delphine said, "From the fence." Iris said, "From the fence." Delphine walked over to a stack of laminated maple. She touched it. She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was something in her face that had not been there before. Iris saw it. Iris had been waiting for it. Delphine said, "Mrs. Halloran, I need to sit down for a moment." Iris said, "Of course." There were 2 old wooden chairs at the back of the mill. Iris had built them. Years before, from scrap fir. She had stained them dark walnut. They walked to the chairs. They sat. The mill stretched out in front of them. Beautiful, quiet, smelling of wood. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Delphine said, "My father was a shoemaker." Iris waited. Delphine said, "Custom shoes. He had a little shop in Worcester, Massachusetts. Bench-made Oxfords, brogues, riding boots. He apprenticed under a man from Hungary when he was 16. She paused. She said, "He had calluses on his hands, the size of nickels. He smelled like leather. He smelled like polish. When he was happy, he hummed. He hummed Sinatra." She stopped. She breathed. She said, "He closed the shop the year I was 14. Iris waited. Delphine said he couldn't compete with the bigger places, the mail order places, the cheaper places. He held out as long as he could. He took on debt. He missed the mortgage twice. My mother begged him to close. He held out one more year, then one more. Then she stopped. She said, he sold the equipment for almost nothing. Sold the lasts, the tools, his grandfather's all. He sold all of it. She said, he took a job as a clerk in an insurance office. He wore a tie every day. He hated it. He hated every single day of it. She said, he died at 53, heart attack, the day before my college graduation. I was finishing my degree in business. I was so proud I was going to. I had a job offer from a consulting firm in Boston. She paused. She said, he never saw me walk. Iris closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. Delphine said, do you know why I went into business, Mrs. Halloran? Iris said, tell me. Delphine said, I told myself it was because I wanted to be successful, to make money, to buy my mother a house. She said, and I did. I did all of those things. She said, but the real reason. She breathed. She said, was that I thought. If I learned the language of the people who killed my father, I would never have to watch another craftsman die. She said, I would be on the inside. I would. I would protect them. I would change things. She stopped. She looked at her hands. She said, Mrs. Halloran. Iris said, yes. Delphine said, I have spent 10 years. Iris said, yes. Delphine said, I have spent 10 years. She could not finish. Iris waited. Delphine said, becoming the thing that killed him. Then, finally, she cried. She did not sob. She did not collapse. She simply sat in the wooden chair Iris had built her, and she let the tears come down her face, in silence, the way water comes down a window pane. Iris did not move for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out. She took the younger woman's hand. She held it. The hands were different. Delphine's were soft, manicured. The hands of a woman who had not done physical work in many years. Iris's were rough, calloused, stained. The hands of her father and her grandfather and her great-grandfather, all the way back to whoever had first picked up a piece of wood and decided to make something from it. But the hands fit together, the way hands do when they need to. After a long time, Delphine said, I'm so sorry. Iris said, for what, dear? Delphine said, for the letter, for the threats, for the... Iris said, stop. Delphine looked up. Iris said, Miss Voss, listen to me. Delphine listened. Iris said, you are sitting in this mill, right now, alive. Your father did not get to sit in this mill. He did not get to see this. He did not get the chance. She paused. She said, but you are sitting here, and you can see now what you might do. Delphine said, Iris said, you did not become the thing that killed him, Miss Voss. You became the thing that is sitting in this chair right now, looking at this room. Whatever you do next is yours to decide. Delphine wiped her face. She said, I don't know what to do. Iris said, I think you do. Delphine looked at her. Iris said, I think you came to this town with 10 years of being someone else. And the first time you walked into a place that reminded you of him, you knew. Delphine said, Mrs. Halloran. Iris said, you knew on Thursday, didn't you, dear? When you sat in my kitchen. Delphine was very still. She said, yes. Iris said, yes. Delphine said, I knew. Iris said, I know. Wren stepped into the doorway of the mill. She had been waiting in the workshop, listening, watching. Iris had asked her to wait, to give the two women space. Now, Wren stepped forward. In her hand, she held a folded piece of paper, soft from age, the edges yellowed. She walked across the concrete floor. She walked past the table saw, past the maple stacks, past Delphine, who watched her come. She stopped in front of her grandmother. She said, "Grandma." Iris said, "Yes, sweet pea." Wren said, "I have something for you." She held out the piece of paper. Iris looked at it. She did not recognize it. Not immediately. The paper was folded into quarters. The fold lines were soft. Wren said, "I was 11. I was in the workshop. I opened a drawer. I shouldn't have. I know I shouldn't have, but I did. And I read this, and I didn't understand what it meant, but I kept it. I've kept it for 11 years, Grandma." Iris took the paper. She unfolded it. She read it. It was a letter. It was a letter she had written to her father in August of 2001. The letter that said, "I don't know what I'm doing, Daddy, with the wood, with Wren, with any of it." The letter that said, "But I think maybe I do know." The letter that said, "I just don't know how to say it yet." Iris read the letter twice. Then she closed her eyes. For the first time in the entire story. For the first time since the fence had gone up in the spring of 1999. For the first time since Callaway Halloran had died. For the first time since Ardith. For the first time since Tobias, 28 years before, Iris Halloran cried. She cried without making a sound. Her shoulders shook. Her hand came up to her face. The letter trembled. Wren knelt down in front of her, put her hands on her grandmother's knees, did not say anything. Delphine sat in her wooden chair, holding the older woman's other hand, witnessing. After a long time, Iris said, "Wren?" Wren said, "Yes, Grandma." Iris said, "I didn't know." Wren said, "I know you didn't." Iris said, "I didn't know you'd seen it." Wren said, "I didn't know how to tell you." Iris said, "I wrote that when you were so angry, when you didn't want to be here. I thought I was going to lose you. I thought I was going to do all of this with nobody to." She stopped. She said, "And you read it, and you stayed." Wren said, "Grandma?" Iris said, "Yes." Wren said, "I didn't stay because of the letter." Iris said, "No?" Wren said, "I stayed because you let me. Because every weekend I came back, you opened the door. You made me coffee. You let me sit and watch. You sort the wood." She paused. She said, "You taught me what to look for in the grain." She said, "Grandma, the letter just told me that you were doing it, not knowing, just like me." She said, "And that meant, it meant I could do it too, not knowing, just like you." Iris pulled her granddaughter into her arms. The two of them stayed like that for a long time. The afternoon sun moved across the mill. The light fell on the table saw, on the jointer, on the stacks of maple, on the sign above the door that read Halloran and Granddaughter Custom Millwork. Delphine Voss sat in her wooden chair. She watched. She did not look away. She thought, "I want this. I want this. Not for myself, for my father, for everyone like him." She thought, "I am going to make this right." There was no lawsuit. That was the thing. There never needed to be. Delphine drove back to the factory that afternoon. She called her assistant. She canceled her meetings for the rest of the day. She sat in her office. She drafted a settlement. She drafted a contract. She drafted a memo to corporate. The settlement was simple. Northbridge Timber would pay Iris Halloran $15,000 in recognition of her unpaid storage and curation services. Not the full $47,000, but a real number, a defensible number. Out of Delphine's own departmental optimization budget, she would arrange an additional $25,000, a separate line item, quietly approved. She would call it vendor onboarding fees. Nobody at corporate would question it. The contract was an exclusivity deal, 10 years. Halloran and granddaughter custom millwork would have first rights purchase on all off-cut material from Northbridge Timber's Coldwater Bend facility. They would pay a nominal rate per board foot below market, but not insulting. Northbridge would convert a disposal liability into a small documented revenue stream. Halloran and granddaughter would have a permanent, inexpensive supply of raw material. It was a win for both of them. Delphine signed her name on the memo. She did not, in the memo, mention any of what had happened in the mill. Some things do not belong in a memo. The mill opened officially in the spring of 2012. Wren did not go back to college. She became her grandmother's apprentice, then her partner. 6 months after the mill opened, she put her own name on the title. She learned, the way Iris had learned, the way Callaway Halloran had learned, by doing, by failing, by sweeping the floor at the end of every day and noticing what was there that hadn't been there the morning before. The mill grew, slowly, the way good things do. By 2014, they had 3 employees. By 2017, they had 5. They built dining tables, built-in cabinetry, architectural moldings, heirloom pieces. Their work was featured in magazines twice. They never advertised. People found them. Iris worked at the mill for 8 more years. She died at the age of 80, in her sleep, in her own bed, in the farmhouse her grandfather had bought for $800 in 1922. Wren found her on a Sunday morning. The cherry trees were budding outside the window. The first warm light of April was coming through the curtains. Iris had a small notebook on the bedside table. The notebook was open. The last page was a letter. It said, "Daddy, I built it. Your daughter Iris." On the wall of the office at Halloran and granddaughter custom millwork today, right now, hangs a framed copy of the original invoice, $47,281.50. Next to it, a black and white photograph of Callaway Halloran and Ardith Halloran, 1947, standing in front of the just-built workshop. Below the photograph, in Iris's handwriting, carefully framed, "Waste is a failure of imagination. Patience is an asset." Delphine Voss is 49 years old now. She is still at Northbridge. She is now the Vice President of Sustainable Operations, a position she created, a position she fought corporate for. She drives by the Halloran property every day on her way to work. Every November, on the morning of November 1st, she brings a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums to the mill. Yellow, the flowers her father loved. She leaves them on the workbench. She does not always speak with Wren when she comes. Sometimes she just leaves the flowers and goes. She does this for her father. She does this for Iris. She does this, mostly, for the woman she might have become. If a quiet old craftsman in a small town in Vermont had not handed her a piece of cream-colored paper and changed everything, in the end, that is what the story was about. Not the wood, not the invoice, not the factory, not the fence. It was about a woman who knew how to wait, and a younger woman who learned by watching her that waiting is not the same as doing nothing, that patience, applied with imagination, can build a workshop from a trash heap, can build a granddaughter from a lonely teenager, can build a partnership from a confrontation, can build, in fact, almost anything if you are willing to give it the time it needs, if you are willing to sticker the wood, if you are willing to let it breathe. Iris Halloran did not become famous. She did not become wealthy in the way people use that word. But on the day she died, in the spring of 2018, the mill she had built was full of lumber, Her granddaughter was running the business. The cherry trees were blooming. Her father's photograph was on the office wall, and somewhere in a small leather notebook in a fireproof safe under the workbench, the last entry, in Calvin Mosley's handwriting, dated the 14th of November 2008, read simply, "Cold morning. First frost. Mrs. Halloran out there with her gloves. I waved. She waved back this time. She's done something here. I don't know what yet, but somebody should remember it." Somebody did.